I start reading about Likoualaaux-Herbes. Scientists, National Geographic people have spotted this brontosaur-like thing in the Congo, and it's still there.
The Congo Basin is a place where the sun rarely touches the forest floor, and the water moves with a heavy, prehistoric stillness. For decades, we've heard whispers of something impossible lurking in the Likoualaaux swamps, but in early 2026, the whispers turned into data.
I don't have any information on the Congo except for I heard that there's a dinosaur there. People go, why did you do that? It's not normal behavior. I truly thought I was gonna find it. Everything made sense to me.
High-altitude thermal drones recently captured a heat signature so large and a silhouette so distinct, it challenged everything we know about extinction. This isn't just a ghost story anymore, but a biological confrontation. The shadow in the shallows. The footage that surfaced in February 2026 wasn't your typical shaky cam forest sighting. It was a high-resolution thermal sweep of the Likoualaaux-Herbes River, showing a massive wake trailing behind a long, undulating neck, a shape that looks suspiciously like a sauropod from a textbook. While the world watches the grainy thermal feed, the inhabitants of the Sangha and Ubangi rivers have a name for it that carries more weight than any scientific classification. Likoualaaux-Herbes. This one who stops the flow of rivers is described by local witnesses as a reddish-brown or brownish-gray creature, approximately the size of an elephant, possessing a long, flexible neck and a single horn or tooth. What makes the recent footage a game-changer is the sheer scale of the heat signature. AI-enhanced stabilization reveals vegetation bending in a heavy, deliberate sequence that suggests a weight far exceeding any known African megafauna. These recent thermal overlays show a warm-bodied organism moving beneath thick canopy cover with controlled territorial motion rather than the panicked flight of a typical animal. Unlike the blurry blob squatch photos of the past, this data provides a consistent volumetric mass that matches the 1776 reports of French missionaries who found 3 clawed footprints nearly 3 feet in circumference. We have to look at the century of physical reports that built this case up to understand how big of a news this is. In the early 1900s, German Captain Ludwig Freiherr von Stein zu Lausnitz was one of the first Westerners to meticulously document these sightings. He didn't just record monsters, he recorded biological behaviors. He noted that the creature was said to live in river caves and attack canoes that encroached on its territory. Though it never ate the crews, it was strictly herbivorous. This detail is crucial because it aligns with the territorial nature of hippos. Yet the physical description provided by the Biaka and other indigenous groups consistently points to a long-necked reptilian anatomy that no hippo possesses. The new thermal data has reignited interest in the 80s expeditions led by Roy Mackal, a University of Chicago biologist. Mackal was convinced that the Congo Basin was a time capsule capable of supporting a relict population of dinosaurs. During his time in the Likoualaaux swamps, he identified the Landolphia manni or malombo fruit as the primary food source for these creatures. The locals consistently pointed to this specific vine, which grows near the water's edge, as the creature's favorite meal. Macal's work moved the conversation from folklore to cryptozoology, treating the search as a legitimate biological survey. He famously documented an incident from 1959 or 1960 at Lake Tili, where local pygmies allegedly killed a specimen that had been interfering with their fishing. They described a creature with a long neck and a frill or crest along its back. The story goes that they attempted to eat the meat, but those who did became fatally ill, a detail that suggests the creature's biology might be chemically distinct or even toxic to modern mammals. The Likoualaaux region itself is a 50,000 square mile labyrinth of seasonally flooded swamp forest, much of which remains unmapped and impenetrable to modern science. It is a biological black box where 742 new species were discovered in just the last decade, including the Lazarus monkey and a new species of crocodile. If a massive, unclassified reptile were to survive anywhere on Earth, this is the only place left with the density and isolation to hide it. The 2026 drone footage has added a layer of technological confirmation to these older accounts, showing a creature that spends the vast majority of its time submerged, surfacing only to breathe or feed on overhanging vegetation. But the most compelling part of the recent 2026 data isn't just the thermal video, it's the environmental DNA, eDNA. Researchers trailing the drone's flight path have reportedly collected water samples from the wake areas. Preliminary analysis suggests the presence of unknown reptilian sequences that do not match any known species of crocodile, monitor lizard, or turtle in the African database. These sequences appear to have ancestral markers that lean closer to the archosaur branch of the tree of life. This suggests we aren't looking at a mutated modern animal, but a lineage that branched off millions of years ago and remained stagnant in the deep isolation of the Congo. When you combine the historical footprints, the 1960 Lake Tele encounter, the Malombo fruit sightings, and now the 2026 thermal and genetic data, a picture begins to emerge. We are looking at a creature that is perfectly adapted to a semi-aquatic lifestyle in a high-density jungle. Its long neck allows it to reach fruits high in the canopy while remaining mostly submerged, a clever evolutionary trick for an animal of its size to remain hidden from both predators and human eyes. The drones have shown us that the shadow in the shallows is not a ghost. It is a physical entity with a thermal footprint that generates heat, displaces water, and breaks branches. It is a territorial giant that has managed to outlast the end of its era by retreating into the most inhospitable environment on the planet. As we verify these thermal spikes against the geological history of the basin, the question shifts from if it exists to how it survived. Was this creature always an outlier, or is it a remnant of a much larger prehistoric dynasty that once ruled the African soil, Gondwana's last stand? Now, let's look beneath the mud of the Likoualaaux swamps and into the deep geological crust of the African continent. The Congo Basin isn't just a forest. It is a massive, structural depression in the Earth's surface that has remained relatively stable for hundreds of millions of years. While the rest of the world saw mountain ranges rise and oceans swallow entire coastlines, the heart of Africa stayed remarkably consistent. This stability is the first clue in a mystery that stretches back to the supercontinent of Gondwana, the massive southern landmass that once tethered Africa to South America, Antarctica, and Australia. For a long time, the official history of dinosaurs in the Congo was a blank map, mostly because the dense jungle makes traditional paleontology, digging in the dirt nearly impossible. But neighboring regions in Niger, Morocco, and South Africa have spent the last century revealing that Africa was once the undisputed capital of the giant long-necked sauropods. In the 90s and early 2000s, discoveries of Nigersaurus and Jobaria proved that Africa hosted a unique lineage of dinosaurs that looked remarkably like the descriptions of Mokele Mbembe. These were animals with specialized vacuum cleaner mouths for grazing on soft vegetation and necks that could reach high into the canopy. The 2026 research into the Congo's specific geological layers suggests that during the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, this region was a sprawling network of river deltas and lush floodplains, the exact habitat required to support a massive herbivore. The history of dinosaurs in the Congo is intrinsically tied to the African Gap. This is a period in the fossil record where we simply lose the trail. While North America and Asia have thousands of well-preserved skeletons, Africa's tropical acidity and dense vegetation have recycled most of the bones before they could fossilize. However, recent 2025 and 2024 expeditions on the periphery of the basin found traces of Mansurosaurus, a titanosaur that lived right up until the end of the dinosaur era. This discovery was a missing link, showing that African dinosaurs didn't die out early. They were thriving and evolving independently after the continents split apart. They were smaller, more agile, and better adapted to island-like environments than their massive cousins in the Americas. This brings us to the unique refugee status of the Congo. Geologically, the basin is a craton, a piece of the Earth's crust that hasn't been deformed by plate tectonics for over 2 billion years. While the asteroid impact 66 million years ago caused a global firestorm, the deep river canyons and dense canopy of a proto-Congo might have provided a unique microclimate. Scientists have long debated the refugium theory, which suggests that during global extinction events, certain pockets of life survive in stable zones that are shielded from the worst environmental swings. If the Congo was a stable rainforest or swamp system even 66 million years ago, it could have acted as a biological bunker. In the nearby Tendaguru beds of Tanzania, the discovery of Giraffatitan, one of the largest creatures to ever walk the Earth, showed that the East African ecosystem was a powerhouse of sauropod evolution. These giants weren't just passing through. They were the dominant engineers of the landscape for tens of millions of years. When we look at the 2026 thermal signatures from the Congo, we aren't seeing a new animal. We are seeing the potential continuation of a line that once stretched from the Atlantic coast to the Indian Ocean. The Congo dinosaur isn't a freak occurrence in this context. It is the logical conclusion of a lineage that had no reason to leave. But why the Congo specifically? Nearby places like the Sahara were once lush, but as they turned into deserts, any remaining megafauna were forced to migrate or die. The Congo Basin, however, remained a wet, green lung. This environmental continuity is rare. In most parts of the world, the stage changes so fast that the actors have to evolve or exit. In the Congo, the stage has remained a swamp for an incredibly long time. Recent soil core samples from 2026 indicate that parts of the Likoualaaux swamp haven't changed their basic chemical makeup in over 10 million years. This means an animal adapted to that specific muddy, high heat, high moisture environment wouldn't have been pressured to change its body plan. Furthermore, the 2025 discovery of Tyrannosaurus in Morocco, a last-of-its-kind predator, proved that Africa had its own distinct end-of-the-world fauna that was completely different from what was happening in North America. Africa was an island continent for much of the late Cretaceous, leading to what biologists call insular gigantism or insular dwarfism. If a sauropod lineage survived in the Congo, it likely evolved to be smaller than the 100-foot giants of the Jurassic, settling into the 30 to 35-foot range, exactly the size reported by witnesses and seen on the 2026 drone feeds. This dwarf sauropod model makes biological sense. It's large enough to be a dominant herbivore, but small enough to navigate the tight corridors of a flooded forest. The history of dinosaurs in the Congo and its surrounding territories is a story of resilience and isolation. We have evidence of the giants in the east, Tanzania, the giants in the north, Niger and Morocco, and the giants in the south, South Africa. The Congo sits right in the middle of this golden triangle of African paleontology. It is the heart of the continent, the one place where the soil wasn't turned over by mountains or dried out by sands. By looking at the fossil record of Africa, we see a clear path, a continent that was a cradle for unique long-necked giants who stayed behind while the rest of the world moved on. As we move from the ancient stones to the living forest, we have to ask the hard questions about the mechanics of life. It's one thing for a bone to stay in the ground for millions of years, but it's another thing entirely for a flesh and blood giant to keep breathing in the modern world. If these titans truly made it through the Great Dying, they would have to be the most efficient biological machines on the planet. But can a creature designed for a prehistoric world truly find enough to eat in a 21st century jungle? The physics of a living titan. Even if the geological bunker of the Congo remained stable for millions of years, we have to confront a much more immediate barrier: the uncompromising laws of biology and physics. While the recent thermal drone data suggests a massive presence in the Likoualaaux swamps, the transition from a grainy heat signature to a living, breathing 35-foot sauropod requires overcoming significant ecological hurdles. The first and most pressing of these is the caloric demand of gigantism. A sauropod of the size reported, roughly equivalent to a large African elephant, but with a drastically different body plan, would be a biological furnace. Based on metabolic scaling, a 30-ton sauropod with a metabolic rate somewhere between a modern reptile and a mammal would need to consume approximately 110 kilograms of high-quality foliage every single day just to maintain its mass. In the Jurassic, these giants thrived on gymnosperms like conifers and cycads, which provided high energy density. Modern rainforests, however, are dominated by angiosperms, flowering plants, and broad-leaved trees, which some researchers argue might not have provided the same nutritional profile for a digestive system evolved 150 million years ago. This leads to the ecological footprint problem. An animal requiring over 200 pounds of food daily doesn't just eat. It transforms its environment. In every other ecosystem on Earth, Megaherbivores like elephants create elephant paths, knock over trees, and leave massive amounts of dung that support entire sub-ecosystems of insects and birds. If a population of Mokelembembe were active in the Congo, we would expect to see sauropod highways through the underbrush. Yet, even with 2026 satellite imagery and LiDAR, light detection and ranging, capable of peering through the canopy, these structural changes to the forest remain largely absent. The creature would essentially have to be a ghost in its own habitat, consuming massive amounts of energy without leaving the characteristic wake of a giant. Then there is the matter of the air itself. A common theory suggests that dinosaurs reached their massive sizes due to a supercharged atmosphere. Some studies of air bubbles trapped in 80-million-year-old amber suggest that Cretaceous oxygen levels could have been as high as 30 to 35%, compared to our modern 21%. For a massive animal with a long neck, getting oxygen from the nostrils all the way down to the lungs is a major respiratory challenge. Sauropods solved this with an avian-style breathing system, a complex series of air sacs that kept air moving in a one-way loop, making them incredibly efficient. While this would technically allow them to breathe in our modern lower oxygen world, the drop in atmospheric pressure and oxygen density since the Mesozoic would still mean a 35-foot giant would likely be more lethargic than its ancestors, perhaps explaining why the 2026 footage shows such slow, deliberate movements. Temperature regulation also presents a paradox. For decades, we debated whether dinosaurs were cold-blooded, ectothermic, like lizards, or warm-blooded, endothermic, like mammals. The current consensus is that large dinosaurs were likely mesothermic, somewhere in the middle, or utilized gigantothermy, where their sheer bulk allowed them to retain heat so well that their body temperature remained constant. In the sweltering 90% humidity of the Congo Basin, a 35-foot animal with a high-energy metabolism would actually face a greater risk of overheating than of freezing. The water-dwelling behavior noted in the drone footage might not just be for hiding. It might be a biological necessity, a way to dump excess body heat into the river to prevent their internal organs from cooking. Finally, we must address the Lazarus taxin gap. In paleontology, a Lazarus taxin is a group that disappears from the fossil record only to reappear millions of years later. The most famous example is the coelacanth, a fish thought to have died out with the dinosaurs until it was found in a fish market in 1938. However, the gap for the coelacanth was 66 million years of deep-sea history, where fossils are rarely formed or found. The Congo is a terrestrial environment. For a 35-foot sauropod to remain undetected by the fossil record for 66 million years, it would have to exist in a population small enough to avoid fossilization, but large enough to avoid the genetic death spiral of inbreeding. The thermal drones of 2026 have given us a signature of life, but physics demands more than just a shape. It demands a source of fuel, a way to breathe, and a way to cool down. If this creature truly exists, it has solved the most difficult engineering problems in the history of vertebrate evolution. It has adapted to a lower oxygen world, changed its diet to modern plants, and mastered the art of being a thermal ghost in a shrinking forest. If the laws of physics make a living dinosaur so unlikely, we have to ask, what else is large enough and strange enough to cast that shadow in the water? The mirror in the water. In the world of biology, seeing isn't always believing. It's often a matter of perspective. When we look at the recent thermal drone data, we are seeing a heat signature that moves with a specific fluidity, displacing a volume of water that demands a massive physical presence. But the Congo Basin is home to several biological understudies that could easily play the part of a prehistoric giant under the right lighting and atmospheric conditions. To understand the Likoualaaux-Herbes phenomenon, we have to look at the creatures that already call these swamps home, animals that are very real, yet so elusive they might as well be mythic. The strongest candidate for a misidentified titan is the African soft-shelled turtle, Trionyx triunguis. While most people think of turtles as small, palm-sized reptiles, the African softshell is a genuine heavyweight of the river systems. These creatures can grow to be exceptionally large, with some specimens reaching over 3 feet in shell length. But cryptozoological theory suggests that in the undisturbed depths of the Likoualaaux, outsized individuals could be significantly larger. When an African softshell swims, it often extends its remarkably long snake-like neck to breathe, leaving only its head and the tip of its snout above the water. To a witness in a low-slung dugout canoe, a massive, leathery shell submerged just beneath the surface, coupled with a 3-foot neck rising from the water, looks indistinguishable from the mini sauropod profile. This is particularly compelling given that these turtles are known for their reddish-brown or grayish skin, the exact color palette reported for Likoualaaux-Herbes. Then there is the elephant in the room, or more accurately, the elephant in the river. The African forest elephant, Loxodonta cyclotis, is a distinct smaller species than its savanna cousin, and it is a master of the swamp. Forest elephants are frequently observed crossing deep rivers by walking along the bottom, completely submerged except for the tip of their trunk. From a distance, a trunk raised vertically out of the water to breathe looks strikingly like a long, slender neck. If the elephant is also carrying a large branch or if its back is partially visible, the silhouette becomes a dead ringer for a long-necked aquatic reptile. In the dense, humid haze of the Congo, where distances are hard to judge, a swimming elephant is the perfect biological optical illusion. We also cannot ignore the giants that truly belong to the reptile family: the Nile monitor and the African rock python. The Nile monitor, Varanus niloticus, is Africa's largest lizard, capable of reaching lengths of nearly 7 feet. However, recent 2025 and 2026 sightings have fueled rumors of even larger river dragons, monitor lizards that have reached gigantism due to the lack of predators and an abundance of food in the deep swamp. These lizards are semi-aquatic, highly territorial, and possess a rooster-like frill or crest along their backs, a physical feature often cited in Likoualaaux-Herbes reports. Similarly, the African rock python is a titan that can exceed 20 feet in length. When a python of this magnitude swims, its body moves in undulating coils that can create a series of humps above the waterline, mimicking the appearance of a much larger, multi-segmented creature. Even the new science of 2026 supports the idea that we are still identifying the mirrors in the water. In the last decade, scientists officially documented 742 new species in the Congo Basin, including a previously unclassified species of slender-snouted crocodile. This new crocodile, Mechistops leptorhynchus, lives in the most remote freshwater areas and is perfectly camouflaged in thick vegetation to avoid human interference. If a medium-sized crocodile can remain hidden from science until the 2020s, it stands to reason that larger, rarer versions of known animals, or perhaps a yet-to-be-named species of giant monitor or turtle, are the true sources of the dinosaur heat signatures. The 2026 drone footage shows something moving with weight and purpose that is undeniably biological. But in a forest that is still surrendering its secrets, the monsters we find are often just the familiar inhabitants of our world, grown to sizes we didn't think possible, and behaving in ways we've never seen. The mirror in the water doesn't reflect a dinosaur from the past. It reflects the incredible, evolving biodiversity of the present. But if these sightings are just misidentifications of modern giants, it raises an even more haunting question. When exactly did the real giants finally leave the African stage? The last of the Titans. The final chapter of the dinosaurian dynasty in Africa is not a story of a slow fade into the sunset, but rather a dramatic and high-stakes burnout at the very edge of the abyss. For decades, the end of the Cretaceous period in Africa was a literal blank page in our history books, a fossil gap that led many to believe the continent's dinosaurs had vanished long before the rest of the world. However, groundbreaking discoveries in 2025 and early 2026 have completely rewritten this narrative, revealing that African giants like Mansurosaurus and Chenanisaurus were not only present, but were actively diversifying right up until the moment the asteroid struck 66 million years ago. The discovery of Mansurosaurus shahinai in Egypt's Sahara Desert was the holy grail that paleontologists had been seeking for a century. Roughly the size of a school bus and weighing as much as an African bull elephant, this long-necked titanosaur proved that Africa's last dinosaurs weren't isolated relicts or evolutionary dead ends. Instead, they were part of a sophisticated, interconnected ecosystem that shared links with Europe and Asia, moving across land bridges even as the continents drifted apart. This means that the biplane of the long-necked sauropod, the very shape reported in the 2026 Congo drone footage, was a highly successful and modern design at the end of the Mesozoic. Even more telling is the 2026 research into the Moroccan phosphate mines, which has unearthed a lost world of African predators and herbivores from the final million years of the dinosaur era. These fossils, found in marine rocks where terrestrial carcasses were washed out to sea, show a fauna that was lightning fast in its evolution and thriving in the low latitudes. While the northern hemisphere was dominated by T-Rex, Africa had its own specialized rulers like Chenanisaurus barbaricus, a shorter-snouted, bulldog-faced predator that sat atop a diverse food chain of titanosaurs and duck-billed dinosaurs. The data suggests that at the KPG boundary, the thin band of iridium-rich rock that marks the end of the age of reptiles, African dinosaurs weren't in decline. They were in their prime. So, if they were so successful, why did they disappear? The 66-million-year-old asteroid impact triggered a global impact winter that halted photosynthesis and collapsed food webs. In most parts of the world, this was a total wipeout for any land animal larger than a house cat. Yet, the 2026 analysis of cratonic stability offers a tantalizing what-if. The Congo Basin sits on one of the most structurally sound pieces of the Earth's crust, the Congo Craton, which has remained geologically unchanged for billions of years. While the rest of the world was being reshaped by tectonic fire and flood, the deep, stable heart of Africa might have acted as a buffer. We know that freshwater ecosystems, lakes and river systems, suffered far less extinction than marine or open land environments because they rely on detritus, decaying organic matter, rather than immediate photosynthesis. Crocodilians, turtles, and even some birds survived by retreating into these muddy, dark sanctuaries. If a smaller, semi-aquatic lineage of African titanosaur had developed a similar strategy, retreating into the seasonally flooded labyrinth of the Congo Craton, they would have been in the best possible position to weather the storm. The last of the giants may not be a literal dinosaur standing in a swamp in 2026, but the legacy of their survival is written into the very fabric of the Congo. Whether the thermal drones have captured a relict population of dwarf titanosaurs, or simply the most elusive mega-turtles and elephants on the planet, the result is the same. The Congo Basin remains the world's greatest biological vault. It is a place where the line between the prehistoric past and the technological present is blurred by a canopy of green and a floor of ancient mud. As we look at the grainy thermal feeds and the 66-million-year-old bones, we realize that the giants never truly left our imagination. And in the deepest, darkest corners of the Likoualaaux, they may never have left the water at all. Why the giants persist? The lost world trope persists because we have a deep-seated psychological need for the map to have blank spaces. In a world of total satellite surveillance, the idea that a 35-foot sauropod can evade a thermal drone represents the last stand of mystery against a sterilized, discovered world. However, we must acknowledge that much of the Mokele Mbembe narrative was shaped by colonial-era explorers who superimposed Western dinosaur imagery onto complex local African spirits and oral histories, often ignoring the nuanced spiritual context of the Likoualaou people to fit a prehistoric fantasy. Yet, this obsession with a living fossil offers a powerful, if unintentional, gateway to conservation. While the world hunts for a phantom dinosaur, the real giants of the Congo, the forest elephants, the elusive Congo peafowl, and the bonobos, are facing a very modern extinction. These species are the true titans of the basin, and their habitat is being eroded by deforestation and climate shifts at an alarming rate. Perhaps the dinosaur in the water is a biological metaphor, a warning that if we don't protect the deep green silence of the Congo, the last great mysteries of our planet will truly vanish into the mud, leaving only grainy thermal ghosts behind. What do you make of this resurfacing dinosaur rediscovery? Hit the subscribe button for more stories like this, and thanks for watching.